Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar called Harvesting a Profit, Benchmarking Your Business with an Agribusiness Analysis. Before we begin, I'm just going to mention a couple of technical items. Right now, all participants are in a listen-only mode. If you have questions throughout the presentation, you can go ahead and type them into the text chat button on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll take those at the end of the session. We're going to leave some time for question and answer there. The other thing I would point out is that we are doing a recording of today's session, and that recording, along with all webinars for Farm Credit East, are available at farmcrediteast.com/webinars. So to kick it off, let me introduce myself. I'm Tom Cosgrove, Senior Vice President of Public Affairs and Knowledge Exchange. I'll be introducing our speakers and moderating the question and answer portion of the program. So let me introduce our presenters. We have Chris Lawton and Caitlin McCullough. Chris is our Director of Knowledge Exchange. He's based here in our Enfield, Connecticut office. And Caitlin is a business consultant in our Auburn, Maine office. Before I turn it over to Chris and Caitlin for the presentation, I just want to make a point of thanking our supporting organizations that help spread the word about this webinar series. Farm Credit East is very committed to supporting beginning farmers, and these webinars are really targeted to folks who are interested in getting started in farming, or maybe have just gotten started in their farming operation. I want to point out that the organizations listed on the slide here, many of them have their own programs. We're fortunate here in the Northeast that there's a strong commitment with a number of stakeholders and organizations committed to getting folks their start in farming. And so a number of them have their own programs, whether they be technical assistance, other conferences, or other resources and materials. So I would encourage you to check out the folks who are listed on the slide here to see what kinds of programs and opportunities that they have available. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris and Caitlin for the presentation.
Great, thanks, Tom. Today's session will cover using profit measures effectively. We'll cover benchmarking against ourselves and competitors, the idea of setting goals, margin analysis, variable and fixed cost challenges. We'll touch on marketing, and then finally we'll cover what's called the SWOT analysis. I'll turn it over to Caitlin for the next slide.
Thanks, Chris. We're going to start today with benchmarking. The idea of benchmarking is basically the notion of comparing your business and its financial results to some kind of standard or comparison numbers. It's a way to look at the results you're seeing and make a comparison compared to your own history, other businesses in your industry or region, or to the goals you've already set. Now, in session 1, we covered record keeping and financial statements. We talked about what they mean and how important they are. It's critical to note that without good records, you won't be able to make a good benchmark comparison either.
That's right, Caitlin. In session 1, we talked about how financial records are like a scoreboard in a game. Without good records, there's no way to tell whether you're winning or losing. But if you do keep good records, one of the most basic and most useful kinds of benchmarking is benchmarking yourself over time. One of the challenges of running an agricultural business is that revenues and costs can vary widely from one period to the next. In this chart, we can see a hypothetical farm's net income by year. If we look at either year 2's income or year 4's income, neither one would really be representative of the average income of that business. It's important to look at averages over time and get a more accurate picture of the business. But even by looking within this time period, we can try and draw out some lessons. For example, what happened between years 1 and 2? Why did net income fall so much? Was it due to entirely external events, such as a decline in commodity prices? Or was something else, something within the control of the farm that could be looked at? Why was year 4 so good? Did the farm introduce a successful new product? Did the farm put in new cost control measures? Determining these things will require drilling down into the farm's financial records and comparing year-over-year revenues and expenses by category. Looking at business results from one year to the next can be very illuminating. It's important to plan, measure results, then evaluate and adjust your future direction.
Another form of benchmarking is comparing yourself to peers in your industry and region. It can be a good way to reality check your results and goals. If other farms in your sector are achieving a 4% return on assets on average, it's probably going to be tough for you to get a 10% return for your business. Looking at the revenue and expenses of your peers is a great way to evaluate your own performance to see where you are doing well and where you have room for some improvement. There are several different ways to benchmark yourself to peers. You can look by industry. Farm Credit East publishes benchmarks for 10 Northeast farm industries, including retail farm markets, garden centers, cash field crops, dairy, equine, greenhouse, nursery, orchard, and wholesale vegetables. These are all part of our Benchmark Solutions programs, and they're available free of charge. In addition, Farm Credit East has 4 paid benchmarking programs called Success Strategy Benchmarks. These take a deeper dive into business metrics of their industries. They are available for dairy, agricultural retail, green industry, and wineries. They offer a real in-depth look at both financial and operational metrics that a business can use to compare itself to peers within their industry. Establishing a relationship with a non-competing peer that you can compare yourself and bounce ideas can be a great thing. This could mean another business in the commodity marketplace, like another dairy farm or another grain farm. Or in a more competitive industry, it might be someone outside your immediate area that you can compare notes with.
Great. Another form of benchmarking is comparing your performance to your own goals. One of the most important aspects of achieving a goal is setting the right goal in the first place. The best goals are what we call SMART goals. That is, specific, measurable, attainable, rewarding, and timed. Specific means the goal must be specific enough to be identifiable. Vague goals are tough to measure. For a new farm, one goal could be to get to break even. But it would be better to get even more specific. How about increasing gross margin by 10% over the next year? Measurable. In order to determine if the goal is obtained, a system for measuring progress must be established. For example, if feed costs seem too high for a dairy, one way to track feed costs per hundredweight or income over feed costs are measures that could be used to track progress. Attainable. Be sure to set goals that are realistic. Benchmarks can help with this. Trying to make the top 25% of your industry can be an achievable milestone to shoot for. Setting smaller sub-goals or checkpoints on the way to your primary goal can help. Next would be rewarding. Set goals that are consistent with your overall vision of what you want your farm business to be. And they need not be entirely financial. For many farmers, environmental sustainability metrics could be rewarding goals to shoot for. But it's important to note that any business needs to make the finances work in order to survive. The final aspect of SMART goals is timed. A goal without a time horizon is a dream, not a goal. Having said that, things change and stuff happens. Don't despair if you don't achieve a goal by the time you've set. It's okay to revise goals and time horizons as you work toward them, but it's still important to have a target time frame to work towards. In the boxes are some examples of SMART goals and action steps. One such goal is to improve production on a dairy herd by 2% by end of year. That goal is specific, measurable, attainable, rewarding, and timed. So the first action step is to consult with a nutritionist. The farmer will then monitor his progress and measure his production against other farms in his size group. The lower box is a SMART goal for a wholesale nursery. It's to increase plant sales by 10% year over year by June. Ambitious but doable. How? By making 3 extra sales goals per week. The grower will track sales weekly and compare sales with the prior year.
One of Farm Credit East's most robust benchmarks is for the dairy industry. Each spring, we publish the Northeast Dairy Farm Summary, which contains a wealth of financial data on the economics of dairy farms in the region. One of the things that we have concluded is that while many farms aspire to improve their profitability, there is more than one way to get there. On this slide, we've identified 5 distinct strategies that dairy farms have used to get into the top profit group in the Northeast dairy industry. If you look at the chart, you can see while each of these farms in each of these strategies have have managed to achieve superior returns, they got there in different ways. One group, called Great with Cows, had their profitability primarily driven by increased per cow productivity. As can be seen in the red box, the labor-efficient group was able to utilize their labor exceptionally well. The better milk price group was able to get more for their milk, and the tight with the buck group controlled costs exceptionally well, resulting in the lowest cost of production, and the balanced group managed to do well all around rather than in one particular area. This example relates to dairy, but the principle is transferable to other industries. There's more than one way to do things well, and it all relates to playing your strengths. If there's something you're able to do exceptionally well, we should all be capitalizing on it.
So to wrap up this segment, benchmarking is an important way to maximize your resources and capitalize on your strengths. Match your skills and resources to the right method for you. No one style is the right style. And remember the saying, if it is to be, it is up to me. In agriculture, there's a lot that's outside of our control. Weather, regulations, commodity markets, pests and diseases, and more. So the key is not to agonize over the things we can't control, but to focus on those things we can. We can't control the weather, but we can put in irrigation if it's too dry, or put up a polytunnel to protect from frost. We may not be able to control regulations, but we can educate ourselves and comply. We can't control commodity markets, but we can all diversify our offerings, work on our cost of production, or employ other risk management strategies. The point is that there are a lot of events we can't control, but in the end, how we prepare for and react to them is up to us. And if we can figure out what we're best at and pay to our strengths, we'll be successful.
So our next topic is business analysis. We've talked a lot about financial record keeping and the importance of having good business information to work with. Ultimately, running a business is about making good decisions, and those decisions can only be as good as the information that we've based them on. Good information is the key to running any successful business. So now we're going to look at how really these records can be useful and make good management decisions.
Great. In the first session that we had last week, we introduced the concept of COGS, also known as variable costs. COGS stands for cost of goods sold and is the sum of expenses directly associated with the product being sold. Examples of COGS include product purchased for resale, direct labor, packaging, supplies used in production, or anything directly tied to making your product.
The flip side of variable costs, or COGS, cost of goods sold, are fixed costs, which are also referred to as overhead expenses. These are costs that generally remain the same, regardless of variations in your production. In other words, what it costs you to keep the lights on, regardless of whether you produce a product or not. Some examples of these are office expenses, property taxes, insurance, depreciation, or anything not directly related to your production.
A good way to look at your income is by using a gross margin analysis. The gross margin is what's left after all product costs, or COGS, are paid for. Here is a hypothetical gross margin income statement for a small turkey farmer. Here we can see that her gross sales were $100,000. Her COGS, or her variable costs, came to 60% of that, or $60,000. This would include things like feed and direct labor. That leaves a gross margin of 40%. It's this amount that is used to pay overhead and hopefully leave some amount over for profit. Her fixed costs, the overhead in the operation, came to $20,000. That leaves $20,000 left over as net income. It's important to note that $20,000 in fixed costs probably wouldn't vary a whole lot if this farm were to produce 100 extra birds. These are costs like insurance, electricity, office expenses, etc., that would likely stay the same even if a few more birds were produced. This farm has a good gross margin, so an extra 100 birds would allow her to spread out her overhead and would enable her to earn more income. This is what is known as economy of scale. Of course, there are more factors to consider. Would she have a market for 100 more birds? Would increasing production costs require additional investment? But in general, this is the reason why it often makes sense to optimize your production for your facilities, as we covered in the last session, to make your overhead as efficient as possible.
So what if your gross margin is not as good as our hypothetical turkey farm? Here are some reasons why your gross margin may be low. It could be that your pricing's too low. And can you control pricing? If you're running a retail greenhouse and your hanging baskets are selling out at $7.99, maybe you should try charging $8.95 and see if they still sell just as well. Even if you don't sell quite as many, you will still be making more money at the end of the day by getting $1 more per unit. It's tougher if you are in a commodity business, but there are sometimes still some opportunities to improve prices or negotiate a better deal for yourself. On the flip side of low revenue is that expenses could be too high. Are your production costs out of line? Is there something you could do to squeeze costs out of your production system? Could you improve your yields per input? Finally, shrink also could be too high. Shrink is any product grown or made but that is not sold due to lack of demand, poor quality, spoilage, etc. Shrink can definitely kill your profits. As an example, if you grew 1,000 pounds worth of tomatoes and sell them at a good price and manage to control your costs, you're probably doing pretty well. But what if you only sell 60%? You may have done all that work and only have very little at the end of the day. This is one reason retail-focused growers sell occasionally into the wholesale market. Even if you have to sell at a smaller margin or just recover your cost, it can still reduce all the shrink. It's another reason to also work on quality. If some of your products are unsaleable, that's money out the window.
So another reason that gross margin analysis is important is that fixed and variable costs behave differently. Considering fixed costs, if they are too high, it could be for a number of reasons. Is your facility too large or too expensive? Have you grown into using your full capacity? Are you using your facilities efficiently? Did you overbuild? A note about investment in fixed costs is that they are harder to manage after they are implemented. Variable costs can often be adjusted with production, but once a barn is built, you're generally stuck with those fixed costs. If fixed costs are too high, it's often a sign that you need to increase production to cover your overhead, or of course find a way to reduce those fixed costs.
So let's look at what are fixed costs and how you can estimate them before you make the investment. The answer is known as the dirty five of overhead. For most investments in infrastructure or equipment, the dirty five will make up the majority of the fixed costs that go along with them. The D stands for depreciation and is, of course, the cost of the item itself spread out over its useful life. Now, on the income statement, depreciation is sometimes dismissed because it's called a non-cash expense. For example, if you've already paid for a tractor, the depreciation on your accrual income statement isn't taking anything out of the checkbook. But it's an important factor in depreciation because it's a measure of the rate at which your equipment and facilities are wearing out. And if you can't cover depreciation out of your profits, you're not going to be able to reinvest in your business. So depreciation is important, and it's often the largest number in the dirty five. The first I stands for interest. Much of the time, your equipment purchases will be financed, and that means you'll have an interest expense. If you're contemplating a long-term investment, think about what it would mean if interest rates increased. Would you still be able to cover that interest expense? The R stands for repairs. These tend to increase as equipment ages. Often, depreciation will go down over time as your equipment goes older, but repairs will generally rise to make up for that decrease. When repair costs exceed depreciation, it may be time to consider investing in new equipment. The T stands for taxes. These may be minor in the case of some equipment, or it could be significant in the case of a land purchase. Finally, the last I stands for insurance. Insurance is the cost of insuring the item. If you build a new barn, you'll probably want to insure it. Put all together, the dirty five are typically the major costs you should be thinking about when you're considering a long-term business investment.
So moving on to some ways of measuring production. There are a lot of ways of measuring production efficiency and costs, and there's no single right way. A lot of metrics can be useful, in making management decisions. Here are a few metrics that can be used to measure production. You could look at your cost per hundredweight of milk, per ton of silage, per barrel of cranberries, per bushel of apples, or per pound of turkey. These obviously vary by what industry you're in. And you can look at that on an overall basis or on a gross margin basis. You can look at sales per customer, per worker, per square foot, or per salesperson. You can look at units of production per worker, per square foot, or per acre. To put some of these in context, if you're a dairy farm, you're going to want to know what your cost of production per hundredweight of milk is. If you're a vegetable grower, you're going to want to try to track your costs per unit of output per crop. That way you can make sure that you're making money on everything you produce. A retail store can track average sales per customer, average sales per square foot of retail space, weekly sales, etc. Any of these measurements can be benchmarked, and you can use them to track your performance over time, measure against peers, or look at before and after results when you make a change to your operation. As one example, if you're a retail farm stand, you could look at sales per average customer transaction and whether they increased or decreased due to a promotion you held.
When you look at benchmarks, it's a good idea to look over multiple years for improved analysis. This is particularly important if you're contemplating long-term or major changes. Events can cause variability and skew short-term results. These can include weather globally and locally, government policies, changing economic conditions, market variations, and some other factors. Multi-year averages remove any short-term volatility. This doesn't mean you shouldn't look at short-term numbers and use them to manage your business, but if you're considering a long-term investment, you want to be sure that you're not basing it on an unusually good or bad year.
So there we covered some important concepts about benchmarking and measurement. Moving on to marketing. Marketing is a big topic, and it's one that, to be honest, really deserves its own entire session. So we're not going to really be able to truly do it justice today, but it's too important to skip. So we're just going to cover some high points. Now, an aside, if you're a commodity producer, you may not think you need to pay attention here, and certainly some aspects of marketing may not apply directly to you. But the basic principles still stand. Why is someone going to buy your product? The biggest difference between selling and marketing is that selling is based on a production mindset, the idea of building it and they will come. You produce a product and then you try to find a buyer. On the other hand, marketing starts with the consumer. You find a need and fill it. Think about what a potential customer needs and wants. What attributes are valued by the consumer? Pay particular attention to what products or features are earning a premium or are in short supply in the marketplace. Then you design a product to fill that need. You work backwards from the need to the production system.
The basic concepts of marketing can be broken down into what are called the 5 Ps. The first of those is product, having a product that stands out in the marketplace. Each product needs what is called a USP, or a unique selling proposition. Why would a customer buy your product as opposed to something else? In the end, you want to strive to be better, cheaper, or different. Cheaper can be a dangerous place to play unless you have some unique production advantage over the competition. But better and different are great places to compete because there's more opportunities. The next P is price. If you're selling a commodity product, you're generally limited to market price. You're a price taker, not a price maker. Unique products set their prices. That price must be competitive, reasonable, and fit into the consumer's budget. Ultimately, it's the consumer who determines the price. They will walk away if the price is too high. Sometimes it makes sense to start with a price and work backwards. Figure out how to produce a product for a certain price point. As an example, take a CSA share. You can figure out what the sweet spot for a single share is and then work backwards to see how you can provide the most value for that price point.
Great. Moving on in the 5 Ps, the next P is place. Where, when, and how your product is sold. Have you ever noticed how a bottle of water might cost 50 cents at the grocery store, but $5 if you buy it at a Major League Baseball game? The where, when, and how the same product is sold can make a big difference. So how will you sell your product? At a farmer's market or through a supermarket? Wholesale or direct to consumer? Early season, in season, or late season? Any of these things can make a big difference on the price you receive. Next is promotion. At a basic level, how will the buyer know you exist? This category includes advertising, which is what people most often associate with marketing. And advertising is important, but it's not the entirety of marketing or even promotion. Packaging, merchandising, sales are an important part of it too. What is the experience of doing business with you? We're in what is sometimes called the experience economy. Most people don't need anything anymore. They're searching for new experiences. This is where you tell your story. As a small farmer, you have a great story to tell, and you're selling yourself as much as you are selling a product. What makes you different? For wholesale, in-person contact and storytelling is important, but at retail, you're often not able to tell your story to every individual. How will your promotion and packaging tell it for you?
The last and most important of the 5 Ps is people. Who will you sell it to? Do they need or want your product? How are they fulfilling their needs today? As an example, if you're selling a hairdryer, is this the guy you want to target? Or is it this guy? Your marketing efforts will be the most effective if you hit the right people at the right time when demand is high. As an example, if you are a retail greenhouse, your business is probably slow in the summertime. You may think you need a marketing campaign to bring in summertime business, and maybe you do. Effective marketers never take a day off, but really your marketing efforts and dollars are probably best spent targeting the kind of people who are already inclined to buy your product at the time of peak demand. In this greenhouse case, it could be during the spring planting season when they're already thinking of buying plants and may just need a little nudge to decide where to purchase those plants.
So to sum up, compare your farm to others when evaluating marketing. Learn from their efforts. What are competitors doing? What seems to work? What doesn't? It's always cheaper to let other people make mistakes for you. Learn to listen to your customers. Who are they? How many customers do you have? Is your product different? Are your prices better? Do you have better quality? A more convenient location? In the end, why are people buying from you instead of someone else? If you're new to the marketplace, your target customers are likely already having their needs met elsewhere. What can you offer that's going to pull them away? What's your USP, your unique selling proposition?
Next, we're going to get back to goal setting. And one of the key methods of setting goals is what's known as the SWOT analysis, which is going to require you to look at your business through 4 lenses: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Note that this also can be done both for your business and through individuals. And we're going to go through each of those next.
Go ahead, Caitlin. Oh, sorry, that's me. Your strengths and weaknesses are generally internal factors, and your opportunities and threats are generally external. So to go through the SWOT analysis, what are your strengths? What is it that you are particularly good at? Your strengths typically have the greatest impact on the profitability of your business. All businesses have areas which need improvement, but improvement often comes most effectively from building on your strengths rather than trying to correct every last weakness. That's not to say you ignore your weaknesses, however. It's important to know what they are and how significant they are in affecting your business. Then see how you can mitigate them or work around them. For example, if you're not really a people person, maybe it doesn't make sense for you to be the main salesperson for your company, even if you're the owner. A valid response to that weakness could be to find someone whose strength is in sales and interpersonal communication and give them that task. But if you're weak in a key area, like your company's weakness is quality, maybe you need to tackle that directly. Prioritize those weaknesses that offer the most important opportunity for improvement and that are limiting factors for your businesses. Once strengths and weaknesses are identified, begin to look for opportunities to advance the objectives of your business. Remember to keep the opportunities within the context of your business's objectives and goals. For example, if you're planning to retire in a few years, the opportunities you pursue would likely be very different than if you're a young person just starting out. Remember to look for opportunities to build on your strengths as well as solutions that address your weaknesses. For example, if you're an excellent grower but have a poor location for retail, perhaps it makes more sense to pursue wholesale markets or off-site farmers markets rather than trying to get more retail customers to an out-of-the-way location. Sometimes it can be hard to overcome a weakness, and it's better to capitalize on a strength. If you're a great herdsman but poor at growing silage, perhaps it makes sense to hire a crops person to take over that part of the business so you can focus on what you do best. Finally, there are threats. Identifying external threats is part of the process of developing a risk management plan for your farm. For example, what would happen if milk price drops by $4 per hundredweight? Or if an owner passes away or got divorced? If severe weather destroyed this year's crop? If retail sales drops for some reason? Or if a worker or customer is injured on your property? Farming is risky. Being proactive about a risk management plan is important. For some risks, insurance, including possibly crop insurance, may make sense. For others, it may not. It's hard to insure against every possible contingency. But try to make that a conscious decision rather than something that just happens because you didn't think of it.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Now, we've been through a lot of information today, and so the last thing we're going to do is go through a brief example of a case study to kind of show you the process of how we see these things kind of fitting together. Now, in this case, I'm going to ask you to use your imagination a little bit, and the scenario is that you've just taken over managing for a fruit orchard. You have a bookkeeper who's been keeping records for a number of years, and they have all the financial statements that we've talked about in the last two webinars, as well as historical reports. What might you want to think about? What might you want to see on how to improve your business? Can you advance one slide? Thank you. Okay. Now, as a new manager, you've worked with benchmarking in the past and are curious to see how this new orchard has done and how it measures up against businesses that are similar in size and structure. However, the first step would be to look at your historical data. Let's ask the bookkeeper for 5 years worth of data so we can look at a multi-year comparison. Now, 5 years is probably not a requirement, but it's a good idea to have at least 3 to do any sort of trend analysis. And this will also take out any single-year anomalies that might throw off the overall financial picture. As we said earlier, comparing year-over-year, making year-over-year comparisons on your own records will allow you to analyze those trends. Conclusions can be made about items such as cash flow, profitability, and liquidity, which are all items we talked about in our previous webinar. Comparing ourselves against the benchmark will help you perform a SWOT analysis and offer a side-by-side comparison to other businesses. Now here we've given you a simplified version of a benchmark using % of sales as the common denominator to analyze income and variable expenses. The first half of this table is income. This shows you the benchmark and your new orchard have similar revenue structures. They both have close to 90% of sales in fruit, about 3% in resale products, and about 5 to 10% in other farm income, which equals the total revenue coming into this business. The second half of this table is variable expenses, also shown as a % of sales. Can you see what the major differences are between the benchmark numbers and the new orchard? As you might recall earlier, on the SWOT slide, strengths and weaknesses are internally driven. And anything we pick out here as a large difference between the benchmark and the new orchard are going to fall into one of these categories. Here we've identified 4 items. The 2 largest variances are labor expense and chemical and fertilizer expense. And to a lesser extent, freight and trucking was also a couple percentage points different, and so was other expenses. What this is telling us is that this particular orchard spends a lot more on fertilizer than the average fruit grower, and also has above average expenditures on freight and trucking. These would be classified as weaknesses. It also tells us this orchard spends a lot less on labor than the average fruit grower, and slightly below average on other expenses. These would be classified as strengths. Now, on your own operation, you might want to dig a little bit deeper, and a weakness might look a little more specific. We spend too much on freight and trucking because our orchard is far away from our markets. Or, as a strength, our labor expenses are less because as an owner, I take less of a wage than fair market value because I value the lifestyle of having an orchard rather than a higher wage. The understanding the why is critical to setting goals. Some external influences that are things that are generally out of your control. Many times these can be linked to the internal items as well. In this example, we use soil testing or working with a production expert to achieve lower chemical and fertilizer use. But it would require that outside influence, and so we can group it in the opportunity column. Similarly, for nearly all farmers, weather is an external force beyond our control, and annually should be considered a threat. Another example would be consumer demand. Let's say a new study came out that said apples contributed to heart disease. Although your orchard would not have changed anything about the way it was operating, sales might drop instantly, and there would be very little you could do to bring customers back to buying apples. This slide shows the evolution process from financial data to setting goals. Now that we know the results of our SWOT analysis, we are ready to set some goals. But keep in mind these goals should be reflective of what you want to accomplish, as well as SMART. Remember from the previous slides, SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, rewarding, and timed. And I've given you some examples for this particular case study, such as cutting fertilizer by 5% next year, or as an external threat, buying crop insurance or revenue insurance to mitigate weather-related risk for a specified portion of income.
Great, thanks very much, Caitlin. That was a great case study. So for those of you who would like more in-depth management training, our Generation Next program is designed to take existing managers to the next level. It's ideal for young farmers who already have some management experience or training already, and who would like to identify areas for personal growth and development, gain tools they can use in their business, and have the opportunity to network with other young leaders in agriculture. The Generation Next program takes place over 3 full-day sessions in person with a Farm Credit East consultant and trainer. Contact us for more information if you're interested in this program.
Thanks, Chris. We covered a lot today, but it all revolves around maximizing revenues and profitability. We talked about benchmarking against ourselves and peers, goal setting, and SMART goals. We also looked at margin analysis and talked variable cost versus fixed cost and the Dirty Five. We had a brief overview of some marketing concepts, and we finished with the SWOT analysis.
Great, thanks. Thanks a lot, Caitlin, for that summary. We'll now go to questions, and Tom will moderate the questions that have come in.
Great, thanks, Chris and Caitlin. Excellent presentation. So just a reminder, on the panel on the right-hand side of your screen, you can type in any questions you might have in the chat button there, and I'll pass those on to Chris and Caitlin. I had a couple here I want to maybe kick it off with while some of the folks on the line are getting their questions ready. In terms of, in the section you guys covered on marketing, what would you suggest to a new producer who's sort of facing a little bit of the chicken or the egg issue in terms of knowing what their consumers want, but that yet they don't have a product to produce yet? What are some ideas for how they figure out maybe either which product to go into or how much to grow of a particular product as they're looking at starting their own farming operation?
Sure, that's a great question. I'll take that question. That's a great question, Tom. For marketing, part of marketing is what they call marketing analysis. And you'd want to do that whether you're a new entry into the market or an existing business, and you want to keep abreast of what's happening within market trends. An important thing to look at is to see what else is in the marketplace, see what other people are doing. If you want to sell at farmers markets, go to farmers markets ahead of time, just on your own, and look around. See what's selling well, see what's selling poorly, what's getting high prices, what seems to be selling more weakly or not getting as good prices. You can look at other retail farm stands. It's important to consider the other options the consumer has to them. So even if you're planning on growing vegetables and selling exclusively through farmers markets, remember that your customer is not exclusively buying through farmers markets. They're going to go to grocery stores also. So think about maybe what they're missing from a grocery store and what you can charge compared to what their other options are elsewhere. So there's a lot you can do in advance to get some ideas as far as what you should produce, and that's a great way to approach it rather than just say, boy, I really like to grow asparagus, and I'm going to grow the best asparagus in the world, and everyone's going to beat the door down to get it, and then you grow it and you find that really it's not that popular. It's better to start with a marketing analysis first and work back to what you're going to produce.
Right. Good question. And, the other thing I would add is that, sometimes I see where, to the extent you do get to that point where you've kind of done your research, is that, if there's a way to sort of phase in your production, to sort of, if it's not always possible, but as opposed to going, whole hog initially, kind of phase it in to see, see what's going to work before you sort of plant your whole farm to it.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at things, and to not have all your eggs in one basket. Right. is another good thing. My personal background is I come from a greenhouse nursery business, and we had a garden center. And one of the things that I used to do, especially in the spring, was at least once a week, I would make an effort to get out and visit other garden centers, as well as mass merchandisers like Home Depot and Lowe's, and see what was out there and what they were doing and what they were charging for things. If Home Depot, for example, had creeping junipers on sale for $5, I probably wouldn't be able to get 10 for mine. I'd have to be, certainly close to that, what the consumer's other options are if I want to be selling my product. In other cases, maybe I'm selling something too cheaply. If you don't get out and see what else is out there, you can be kind of isolated.
Right.
And I would hold on one second, Tom.
Yeah,
I would just follow that up with, it doesn't hurt to ask questions. As a consumer, if you're shopping around to see other farmers markets or other stores, as the consumer, you're free to ask whatever questions you want. So if you're thinking about a new variety or how something might sell, you might ask someone who works there, oh, have you ever tried selling this product? Or, you can get a lot of information too just from talking to other people without necessarily giving away that you're the competition. And there are professionals too, ag extension, business consultants that can help kind of frame some of that for you as well.
Great. A great thought, Caitlin. Thank you. So here's a few questions that rolled in. I'll start taking some of these. So can you talk about, we've done a benchmark on CSAs.
CSA is a concept that we've done a benchmark on in the past. We haven't been able to get enough participants to do this in the past year. It's something that we're going to revisit adding in the future, getting back to. We need to have at least a minimum number of participants in order to have a reliable benchmark. But even if you are a CSA, I would recommend looking at we have a benchmark for ag retail farm markets, which is retail sellers of vegetables and produce. And your economics should be, in line with what the ag retail benchmark is.
Right. And so that's that kind of ties into the next question, which I think you may have just hit on in terms of you showed some of the various benchmarks Farm Credit East has, one for orchard fruit. Is there one for vegetables? And so I think the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, we have one for wholesale vegetables as well as one for what we call farm markets in the ag retail category, which is basically the dividing line that we use is because many people sell to both markets, is if your revenue is 50% or more in wholesale, we put you in the wholesale vegetable benchmark. If it's 50% or more retail, we put you in the retail farm market benchmark. And I should mention that those benchmarks are free to participate in and free to access. I'll see that we get them posted to the farmcrediteast.com/webinar site. So that's where the recording of this session will be, the slide deck of the PowerPoint that we used, and I'll also get the spreadsheet of the overview spreadsheet of our benchmarks, and you can also contact us for more in-depth information on a specific industry.
Right, because I know we had issued a report earlier in the year on the benchmarks and kind of touching on a number of them. So.
Yeah, if you're a Farm Credit East customer, you can contact your relationship manager or loan officer and have a benchmark analysis done of comparing your farm to the appropriate benchmark for it, assuming we've benchmarked that industry.
And Chris, so are you saying that can non-customers participate in a benchmark, or is it limited to customers?
For the free benchmark program, it's mostly customers that are participating in it, but they don't necessarily need to have a loan relationship with us. We have quite a few customers that just use financial services or tax prep or something like that.
Okay, great. And I think you answered the question. So, and the actual slide presentation will be available.
Yeah.
At the farmcrediteast.com/webinars.
That should be posted probably tomorrow morning.
Okay.
On the website.
Okay, great. Another question came in. Sometimes a new grower might not have the resources available to get an expert, whether it be in production or marketing. What do you suggest? Because I think there are some resources out there for folks who may not be able to, hire a consultant.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's one of the challenges with a startup business in any industry, and agriculture is no different, is you have to work with limited resources. One thing that I should mention is that marketing doesn't have to be expensive. We often associate it with big companies that have big marketing departments and spend a lot on advertising and things like that. But you don't have to really spend a lot of money to have an effective marketing campaign, especially nowadays with websites and internet and social media. Ultimately, the most powerful marketing you can do is telling your story. Sell your story. Don't just, realize that you're not just selling a product, you're selling a product and a story and an experience. And as perhaps you're a young beginning small farmer, you have a great story to tell. People will be interested in, what you've done, how you're doing it, what your experience has been, your background, all those kind of things. And the more you can do to find a way to tell that positive story, the better you're going to be. A book you might want to consider looking at, I don't know the author, but the title is called Guerrilla Marketing. And I'm sure you could search and find it online or something like that. And it's full of really cheap ways to market a business, using very, ingenious different low-cost strategies.
Okay. Caitlin, anything you want to add on the marketing or production resources for a new business owner who might not have resources to hire someone?
Sure. I mean, more of my experience is probably with the production side of it. Nowadays, there's so many free programs out there that offer both technical assistance as well as business planning. I know in Maine there's, a dozen or so companies that offer some kind of assistance for free, at least to get you started. And I wouldn't be surprised if in your area there would be something similar. Our sponsor list, that might be a good place to start. Contact someone from there, see if they know of anyone that could get in touch with, that you could get in touch with to provide that kind of assistance. I'm a big fan of land-grant universities. If you know an extension agent, you can call them to see if they have any resources, and they might not be able to find the specific thing that you're looking for, but they might give you some good ideas to start with that would be low cost.
Great, thanks for adding that, Caitlin.
Yeah, absolutely. Question is, so the benchmark studies, Chris, you're going to add that to the
website, yeah, to the farmcrediteeast.com/webinars. We'll have the recording of the session, the slide deck, and the benchmark data.
Great. Let me see here. I just want to make sure we're hitting all the questions here. Another question came up in terms of getting started. So, and I know in the first installment from 2 weeks ago, we talked a lot about financial statements, the importance of good records. Someone's just getting started. Maybe they've got fairly limited records initially. What are some of the best practices or the things they can do to get started so that they can start then taking advantage of things like benchmarks and improving their business?
Sure. You can do a lot with computers nowadays. There's Excel spreadsheets that you can track your production metrics on. You can there's computer programs, things like CenterPoint from Red Wing or QuickBooks works, and there's others out there that I'm just not thinking of at the moment. There's a lot you can do very inexpensively. And the better records you have, the better decisions you can make, and the better you can learn from them.
Okay.
And I would add to that.
Anything to add? Go ahead.
Sure. If you're just starting out and you're not quite ready to jump into a program, it's good to just start thinking about what's going to work for your business and have a game plan of how you're going to categorize a lot of this stuff. Because when we come out to businesses, a lot of times what they run into trouble with is that they've categorized the same thing in multiple categories, and that's what generally blurs the line. So just having a plan and sticking to it, put all your fuel in the fuel expense category. I mean, that's an oversimplified one, but just keep things separate, and you'll fare a lot better.
Yeah, building on that, Caitlin, is the importance of being consistent from year to year. If you're making major changes in how you're valuing your inventory or something like that, that's going to make it hard to make year-over-year comparisons. And also, you want to try and avoid commingling expenses that are not related to each other. Like, for example, fuel for your delivery truck and fuel for your greenhouse, you'd want to track separately because those are not really related things.
Another specific pitfall that we see a lot is if you don't know where to put it, you put it in miscellaneous. Really taking the time to sort out some of those variable expenses from the miscellaneous will save you a lot of headaches later. Sometimes when you go out and see, that 15% of your expenses are in miscellaneous, well, no one necessarily knows what that is because it's a little bit of everything that you just didn't know where to put. So consistency and just taking the time to kind of go through some of these items that may be difficult or you're not really sure what to do with. Just make a decision, and if they're all together, it'll be easy to kind of move them around too if you want to later.
And along those lines, think about whether an expense is a variable expense or a fixed expense, like we talked about. Variable or COGS expenses are the ones that are directly part of your production, and your fixed or overhead expenses are ones that you use to keep the lights on, so to speak. And they behave differently. Your variable expenses are those, like if you're, again, I go back to greenhouse examples often because I'm most familiar with it, but your pots, your soil, your plants, that kind of thing, that's part of the direct potted plant that you're going to sell. The variable expenses, maybe the cost of heating that greenhouse, your property tax, whatever. And the reason, one of the things that's different about them is that if your overhead is too high, if you have an overhead problem, you can grow out of that sometimes. You can expand your production. It'll dilute your overhead expenses, and you can get more profitable by producing more out of the same facility. If you have a variable expense problem, that's a hard problem to grow out of because your variable expenses are just going to grow with your production. So it's important to keep in mind that they behave differently.
Right. Well, so I think I don't see any more questions that have come in, so I think we're going to wrap it up here. I just want to thank Chris and Caitlin for the presentation. See if there's any closing comments you want to add. I know we have another kind of the final installment on this. Maybe you could just give a quick preview of that, Chris.
Sure. The third and final installment of the Harvesting a Profit session is titled, "What is the lender looking for?" And I'm actually really excited about that session. It's going to discuss how to ways to fund your business, what the 5 C's of credit are that virtually all lenders are going to look at. It's also going to include an interview with Keith Sexualty, who's the Farm Credit East Enfield branch manager and a loan officer. He's been in agricultural lending for a long time, and he's going to discuss how to do your heading to the bank, whether it's us or someone else. This session will conclude with another interview with Lynn Weaver of Farm Start, which is an alternative lending program, and it will include with a review of some of the key financial statements and a summary case study. So I think that's going to be a very worthwhile session, and I'd encourage everyone to tune into it. As always, registration for it will be at that, or already is, at that farmcrediteeast.com/webinars address. And if there's any follow-up questions or comments, of course, are welcome. You can email me. It's chris.lawton@farmcrediteeast.com. And with that, I'll let you, Caitlin, if you have any final thoughts.
Oh, I think you hit them all. If anyone wants to reach me, mine is caitlin.mcculloch@farmcrediteeast.com. If that sounds too precarious to spell, you can email Chris and he'll forward it on.
Great. Well, thanks to you both, and we appreciate everyone participating.